Welcome to the Bloomington Rotary Club's weekly celebration of service for April 27th, 2021. I'm your current president, Ashley Wesley. Thank you for being here. Natalie, please show the flag for 15 seconds of respectful silence. We ask that you remain on mute and take this time to personally reflect. Now, Alon, do you have something that you might want to tell us about today?
Oh, was I supposed to do the reflection today? Was that? Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Oh, wait a second. There's something really important that I just heard about last week. Oh yeah, no, this is very, very important. Something that everybody should know about. And my apologies for taking a little while to sort of get up to speed on it. So, everybody, we have a big announcement here, and I guess. Ashley, do you know what the announcement's about?
I don't have any idea. This is your show.
Is it? Okay. Okay. It's something about when you take bread and you put it in a machine and push it down and then it warms up and it becomes...
Pancakes?
Close. Not quite close enough. What happens to bread when it gets warm in one of those machines?
I've got it. Toast.
Aha! The Rotary Toast. We have an announcement about the Rotary Toast. And I'm here to let you all know that we have the toast coming up on November 5th this year. Very, very, very exciting. And we've been given permission to even reveal who the person might be. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put 3 words in the chat. And for those of you who already know this, please do not answer, okay? So we want to make sure that this is something that we ask, and I'm going to put 3 words, and this is an anagram. It's 3 words of the name of the individual who is going to be the recipient of the 7th annual Rotary Toast. We're very, very excited to make this announcement. So I don't know if anybody wants to take a go at putting some ideas in the chat about who this person might be. Cool. Somebody who's really cool. Somebody who maybe has hazel eyes, and somebody who maybe even loves to talk a lot. Twitter. So anybody with any ideas of who this person might be? Okay, well, we'll give a few hints along the way. So this person arrived in Bloomington in 1964. Okay. Ashley, do you have something else about this person?
This person has certainly had a major impact on our community.
Okay, good, 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 good. This person is devoted to the truth. No 2 ways about that, and has made a huge difference to the community in terms of bringing truth to the table and to the fore in front of the community in many different ways.
Any guesses yet?
Nobody's putting anything in the chat.
Put them into the chat if you have.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
But I have something else to say.
Okay.
This person has always sought ways to be fair to all concerned.
Okay. My lips are... Okay, so this person really believes in activities that are beneficial to all. So this is definitely somebody who believes in the Rotarian. Okay, Byron Vanguard. Aha! Well done, well done, well done. We found somebody who knows. Somebody was able to rearrange those letters. So we're very happy to announce that Charlotte Ziegler will be the recipient of the 2021 Rotary Toast. So welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
I'm saying that I've always been puzzling. I've always been puzzling, and I hope this was not too much of a puzzle for people. But I also love the idea of being cool, and you can see I decided to go to the beach to remain cool, right? And you can't see my eyes, but I never Twitter. I never Twitter, and I've never tweeted. I deny that. but I'm totally honored and very touched by this.
Congratulations, Charlotte. And the Rotary Committee was so excited when we finally landed on your name as the recipient of this year's Rotary Toast. It was a long discussion. There were a number of people that we were considering, but then there was a unanimous consensus that you would be the one for us to celebrate this year. So we look forward to that. Everybody, please remember that this is November the 5th at 7 p.m. at Ivy Tech. There will be a formal announcement by Rotary sometime in July, but we thought it would be a good idea to have everybody know in the Rotary Club. So that's the news for today.
And Alan and Charlotte, would you like to tell us who your your chosen nonprofit is?
Yes, it's Habitat for Humanity. Because I think we're talking about homeless, working with homeless, that's one of the major solutions.
That's really great. Well, congratulations, Charlotte. It would be wonderful to hear the round of applause, and hopefully this will be something that we can celebrate in person, but there's going to be a mixture of in-person and online opportunities for anybody who wants to participate.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to being there, wherever it is.
Exactly. Good.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Ashley.
Congratulations, Charlotte.
You're funny.
Okay.
It got Martha to leave the room.
We are going to introduce a few guests now, and we have a guest with us of Charlotte. Do you want to introduce your guest?
My guest is Ruth Boshkoff. Many of you know her. She taught children's music at St. Charles School, and she ran the University Children's Choir for quite a while, and she's a special. She taught my children the Orff Kodai method of percussion when they were very small, and I think it really prepared them to understand music. And her husband is a deceased professor from the law school, dearly loved. So she's really interested in politics too. So I invited her to be my guest today. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Ruth. And we hope that you'll come back and join us anytime. Are there any other guests that I have missed? Anyone? Okay, well, welcome again, Ruth, and we hope you'll join us again someday very soon.
I see Dan and Sharon Wiseman.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, guys.
Welcome, Dan and Sharon. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, our producers are Natalie Blaze, Michael Shermis, Sally Gaskell, and Aaron Davis. Thank you so much for making this all run so smoothly. And our roundabout reporter is Sarah Laughlin. A few birthdays: John Vanderzee is tomorrow, and Art Lots is May 3rd. Membership anniversaries: Joyce Poling, 32 years as a Rotarian, and Glenda Murray, 30 years. Congratulations, and thank you so much for being a part of the Rotary family. I wanted to share a quick polio update because I thought the latest update that I received in my email was very encouraging. Total global world polio cases in 2021 is 2, compared with 42 for the same period in 2020. And in 2020 overall, there were 140 cases. So very interesting numbers there. And then the vaccine-derived polio, there have been 63 cases in 2021, and there were 1,081 in 2020. So we are on track to have significantly lower numbers, and I thought it was something to celebrate.
Good.
One of our main causes that hopefully will go off of our cause list and we can move on to something else as that becomes eradicated. So we have a few announcements to make. Solidarity Sleepouts coming up this weekend to support A Friend's Place, and Rotarians Von Welch and Trent Deckard are participating. So if you'd like to support the cause, I don't know if our link will make it in the roundabout in time, but I think that we'll be able to get that out to you to support, but you can also just Google it and find it very quickly. And a couple volunteer opportunities that I came across this week to share. Beacon Winter Shelters looking for more volunteers. We'll include that in the roundabout as well, but they're looking for shelter monitors, people to help with laundry and meals, bring evening meals, and more. So you can find those opportunities and we'll list them for you to see. My Sister's Closet is looking for regular store staff volunteers. I saw this in the volunteer network, and so Sandy, I'm sure can confirm that for us, but Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays when they're open, they're looking for volunteer, and you know what to do. We will list the information in the roundabout as well. Community Kitchen also has every first Friday of the month starting May 7th, they'll need 3 volunteers for the 11:30 to 1:30 time slot. I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to take some of those. So it's help with meal prep and backpack preparation and meal service. We will include that opportunity for you as well. All right, without further ado, who's happy? Let's share some happy dollars for Teachers Warehouse.
Well, I can't help but be happy. So I will pledge, I will put some money in Teachers Warehouse, $10. Okay?
Thank you, Charlotte.
All right, yes. Anybody?
I will match Charlotte's pledge. Charlotte, I'm so happy for you. This is a wonderful recognition for you being our toast honoree. So my $10 is in honor of you.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
And I'm going to put another $10 in for that. Since Charlotte was introduced me to Rotary many years ago, and then finally was the one who coaxed me to join. So thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm going to join the club and provide $10 in honor of Charlotte. And I hope that Charlotte and everybody else, as many of you who are interested in hearing live music, imagine that, will join Voces Novae out somewhere on the Beeline Trail Monday of next week, somewhere around 7 p.m. You can check our Facebook page for more details. We're actually going to be performing maybe 15 or 20 minutes worth of music. And we can't wait to share that with you.
Yippee.
Yay.
Ashley put me in for $10 too for Charlotte. I think this is really exciting.
Great. Thank you, Kate.
$10 for Charlotte. Very exciting. Thank you.
Me too. Thanks, Charlotte.
Me too.
$10.
Well, there are 47 of us, so that means we could times that by 10, right?
Me too. Put me in for Charlotte.
Thank you, Judy.
I add my $10 to Charlotte, considering how long I know Charlotte. And those of you who did not read her book yet, please do. And I was hoping that Elan stick the title of author next to her qualification. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.
I will also donate $10 for Charlotte, and also would like to welcome Miss Boshkoff to our meeting. Actually, I had her for music so many years ago, so it's good to see her again.
Wow.
Rex,
Me too for 10.
thank you so much.
Yes.
Woohoo! Good day for
Whoa.
Warehouse.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll join in too, Martha Foster.
Okay, Martha, thank you. All right. Raj, we didn't want to list author as one of the clues because we thought it would give it away too quickly.
Okay.
We really had to limit our clues completely because it would have given it away pretty quickly. So I'm glad that Byron got it so quickly so we didn't have to give too many vague clues.
That was
Okay.
funny. Thank you.
Can we do one more?
Yes.
Okay, I'm doing $10 for Charlotte, but we're putting a spin on it. In the last couple of weeks, I've been talking to IU School of Medicine about featuring a new book reading for women who are movers in politics, and they were going to be reading the woman who put light on the Flint project for the water there, but now I think they're going to be reading Charlotte's book. So that's my big $10 announcement.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, well, thanks everyone. That was wonderful Happy Dollars. Thank you for sharing in our joy over Charlotte's selection as our toast honoree.
Thank you.
And now we'd like to introduce our speaker. So Steve Moberly. And Steve, you're on mute.
My technician has
Hi,
arranged
everybody.
for me to be vocal now. Today is Judy Schroeder's program, but Judy could not be with us due to conflict in her schedule. So she's asked me to introduce our speaker, who is certainly no stranger to many organizations in Bloomington and Monroe County. Professor Marjorie Hershey, an emeritus professor of political science at the IU, will be talking about policy actually today. She'll be talking about the filibuster and the Biden agenda, what's happening. Usually she's talking about elections, but this is the 1 year out of 4 in Indiana when there are no elections. And what a blessing that is, that we don't have to hear on radio and television the catastrophic events that will happen if so-and-so is elected or if so-and-so is not elected. Professor Hershey has written 4 books. Her interests are campaigns, elections, and politics. She has received many awards for her teaching, especially of undergraduates. She continues to be very active as a person who is often sought out by national media to make comments about elections. So I'm pleased now to introduce Marjorie Hershey.
Very good.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you all, and it's an honor as well for me, given that Rotary clubs do so much good in our communities, and especially in this one. So President Biden has put some very impactful pieces of legislation on his agenda this first term. There's a voting rights bill that would restore the federal government's power to review changes in voting laws passed by several states. There's another bill to protect voting rights against the 300 or more state laws now being considered to put more of a burden on the individual voter. There's a multi-trillion-dollar transportation bill to repair roads and bridges and to encompass other kinds of supporting systems as well, internet access, caregiving activities, and others. And they all have one thing in common. They will all be stopped by the filibuster in the United States Senate by Republican senators. So for Biden to accomplish these very big steps, it will be necessary to either modify or end the filibuster. So what's the filibuster? How come we have one? How does it work? What are the options to loosen its grip on policy? And what's the likelihood that that will happen, at least as much as I can tell you in 25 minutes. So what's the filibuster? It's a rule of the Senate, not part of the Constitution, that says that any one senator or group of senators can stop a bill by talking it to death. In other words, stopping action in the Senate until either the filibusterer gives up or the Senate leadership wants to do other business badly enough that it's willing to drop the bill. It's been an effective Senate rule for less than half of the Senate's history, about a century, although it's existed a lot longer than that. And there are several reasons why it was adopted and why many people think it's a keeper. Some of those reasons are true to the spirit of the Constitution. Others are complete nonsense. So let me start with the position that is the tougher to defend, and that's that the filibuster is in fact in keeping with the main theme of the Constitution. And to do that, let me remind you, the American version of democracy is unusual in the democratic world. Most democracies don't function like ours. Most democracies use a parliamentary system. In that system, the leader of the executive branch is chosen by the lower house of the legislature. So if that were true here, the leader of the legislature's majority party, Nancy Pelosi, would become the prime minister, the first minister who heads all the executive departments like the Treasury and the Defense Department. So the executive branch becomes a creature of the legislature. If a majority of legislators don't like what the executive branch is doing, they can throw it out and start over. We didn't do it that way. The people who wrote the American Constitution were mainly concerned about preventing tyranny. James Madison, who had studied a lot of earlier democracies, said the best way to prevent tyranny was to divide up power as much as possible. So the main principle of the US Constitution, not so much other democracies, was separation of powers, checks and balances, keeping power from concentrating in a few hands. So the executive, the president, is not chosen by the legislature. The president from the beginning was elected by a different set of people and would serve a different number of years than the members of either the House or the Senate. Each of the three branches of government had independent powers of the others. And the state governments also had a set of powers independent of the national government, and they still do. So there's a lot of division of power among lots of sources. Beyond that, each of these power holders had means that were spelled out in the Constitution to block the other's action. And this system of separated powers was thought to give us the best chance of keeping the government from becoming a tyrant. And it's worked pretty well. It's been more than 230 years. And although we've been dangerously close sometimes, we've protected ourselves from becoming a tyranny. When you look at other nations, that's a darn good record. It's also, as I'm sure you've thought of by now, a great way to keep anything from getting done. That's especially true because we are a very diverse and a very populous nation. If we all had the same needs and held the same views, we'd agree on whether or not, for example, we needed a national healthcare system. But there are 330 million of us from lots of different backgrounds, and it's inevitable that we will not agree. That's fine. The purpose of a democracy isn't to get us all to agree. But in this trade-off between trying to get things done on the one hand and protecting individuals' freedom from tyranny on the other, a separation of powers leans heavily in the direction of individuals' freedom. When you have all these different power holders, legislators, presidents, judges, governors, mayors, we elect more officials than any other democracy, then you've got to find some way to get several of these power holders to work together in order to make change happen. But in our system, it's intentionally a lot easier to block action than it is to make action happen. And that's especially true in Congress. There are a whole series of rules that make it easier for the minority to block action by the majority. That's worked in favor of different parties at different times. Right now, it works in favor of the Republicans who do not hold the White House and the two branches of Congress. The Senate, in particular, is designed to give some minorities, and by that, I just mean those not in the majority, whatever their race or their views, more clout, than they would have otherwise. As you know, the Senate overrepresents states with smaller populations because they get 2 senators just like the big states do. So the 580,000 residents of Wyoming are represented by the same number of senators as the 40 million people of California. And today, most of those small population states are Republican dominated. So in the current US Senate, which is tied 50-50 by party, the 50 Democrats represent 41 million more people than the 50 Republicans do. And even in the House, Democratic candidates, because of gerrymandered congressional districts, need to get somewhere around 54-55% of the national popular vote if they're going to get 51% of House seats. If I ask my students, what's a democracy? Most will tell me, well, it means majority rule. But that is less true in the United States than it is in most other democracies. And that's not by accident. The value we place on individual rights is striking. And it reflects the concern of the writers of the Constitution that a powerful majority could be a dangerous thing because it could become tyrannical. So minority rights have to be carefully guaranteed. And in fact, if you read the Constitution, which a lot of people who claimed that they know about the Constitution would in fact do, you can find all kinds of provisions intended to protect individual rights, but not very many guarantees of majority rule. And the filibuster is part of that tradition, which is why it evolved. It gives even a single senator the power to stop the other 99 from taking action. Now, it was adopted by the Senate just a couple of decades after the government started. And when it was adopted, it was absolute. Once a filibuster started, there was no way to stop it until the people who were filibustering voluntarily decided to shut up and let a vote be taken. Later, the Senate thought better of that and decided that a filibuster could be stopped if 2/3 of the senators voted to stop it. That's called cloture. And later, if 60 senators voted to stop it. And that is the number that is required now. But it wasn't used throughout most of American history. It had its moment in the 1950s and 60s when some conservative Southern Democrats used it to bottle up civil rights legislation. In fact, the filibuster by Southern Democrats against the Civil Rights Act of 1964 went on for 74 days, 2.5 months. And the Senate could do nothing else during that 2.5 months. But as Congress grew more polarized by party, beginning in the 1980s, the use of the filibuster started to grow. More senators realized they could score points with their constituents by standing up against bills. And at the same time, those growing party differences were raising the stakes on legislation. Each party was growing more anxious to pass its own bills and more anxious to stop the bills that the other party wanted because the two parties were becoming so much more different. And to do that, both parties gave more power to their party leaders in the Senate to be able to exercise that power. But the filibuster stood in the way. So the Senate found a variety of workarounds. The first one was called a two-track system. If a senator threatened to filibuster a bill, then the Senate could allow the filibuster to continue at the same time that other legislation was being debated. After a while, all a senator had to do was to warn the leadership that he or she was going to filibuster a bill, called putting a hold on a bill, and the leadership would pull the bill from the Senate's calendar if, on the chance that the senator's concerns could be satisfied because they just simply didn't want to deal with it. The crisis point was reached in the late 1900s when a filibuster kept the Senate from voting on the national budget. Now, if we don't pass a national budget, the government stops functioning. So the leadership developed a new rule. Budget bills can't be filibustered. Only a simple majority of 51 votes out of 100 were needed to pass the final version of the federal budget. And because this involved reconciling the Senate's version of the bill with the House version, it's referred to as reconciliation. But it's a very narrow exception. Everything in a reconciliation bill has to pertain specifically to the budget. Nothing marginal can be in the bill. And the whole process can be used only 3 times in a 2-year congressional session. The right to filibuster has taken 2 other hits in the past 10 years. As party polarization got more intense, both parties made greater use of the filibuster to stop the other party's bills. When the Democrats controlled the Senate and the Republicans were filibustering President Obama's nominations to federal courts, the Democratic Senate leadership rammed through a ruling that the federal nominees, except for the Supreme Court, could not be filibustered. They only needed 51 votes. Then, when control of the Senate passed to the Republicans, the Republican leadership rammed through a ruling that Supreme Court nominees couldn't be filibustered either in order to get President Trump's Supreme Court nominations confirmed. So how did the leaders accomplish this? Because adjustments to the filibuster are a matter of procedure, not of substantive issues. So according to the Senate's rules, procedural matters require only a majority vote. 51 votes. In each of these cases, when this happened, the other party called these moves the quote nuclear option, arguing that if you ram through these exceptions to the filibuster, that would lead to completely blowing up the relationships between the 2 parties in the Senate. But since at that time, there were almost no relationships left between the 2 parties in the Senate, that threat didn't amount to much. So you're probably thinking, if a procedural bill requires just a simple majority and it can't be filibustered, how come the Democratic Senate majority doesn't just vote to abolish the filibuster? The Democrats do have 51 votes, counting the vice president who breaks ties. The problem is, not every one of those 51 Democratic votes is willing to abolish the filibuster. 2 of them in particular, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, have stated publicly that they do not want the filibuster to be eliminated. And given the current party polarization, eliminating the filibuster won't get any Republican support either. Party line votes have become basically the rule in the US Senate. So what's the reasoning of the people who want to keep the filibuster? Senator Manchin has been the most explicit about it. He says the filibuster is a way to require that any legislation passed by the Senate be bipartisan, because cloture to stop a filibuster requires at least 60 votes, so it encourages cooperation across party lines. Let me tell you, it's not easy to say that with a straight face. The current Senate couldn't get bipartisan cooperation to break for lunch. Not because senators are cranky people, but because the 2 parties are so far apart in their political beliefs now. And so are the grassroots activists who are so prominent in elections, that there is little or no overlap between them. Another reason why some people want to keep the filibuster is that clearly it's intended to protect the minority party. But every time a majority party is in the Senate, it knows it may not hold that majority for long. And when it's back in the minority, it may need the filibuster to block the legislation that it opposes. One writer said in the Washington Post yesterday, Democrats should take stock of everything they delayed and derailed under Trump because of the filibuster, and then imagine all that and more being enacted by a simple majority vote when Republicans regain control of Congress and the presidency, which they eventually will. We are so evenly divided by partisanship now that it's hard for either party to put together enough of a majority to abolish the filibuster, and hard for either party to imagine that it's going to hold the majority forever. So how come many people want to get rid of the filibuster? The main argument is it's an opportunity for a relatively small minority to throw a monkey wrench into the workings of Congress. And these folks also make the point, which is accurate, that the writers of the Constitution didn't want it. In the Constitutional Convention, the delegates discussed the idea of requiring supermajorities for certain policies. And they did say in the Constitution that supermajorities, more than 51% of the vote, could be required for treaties, for example. So if you're a strict constructionist, then you'd have to note that the Constitution doesn't provide for a supermajority to break a filibuster, the 60 votes that are required for any other legislation. But we found that strict constructionists can sometimes be strict constructionists for some purposes and not others. So short of abolishing it, what are the proposed reforms? The most minimal reform is to go back to what's sometimes called the talking filibuster, that you actually have to stand up in front of the Senate like Mr. Smith goes to Washington and keep talking. And this is equally important, if not enough of your party colleagues are sitting there in their seats in the chamber throughout the filibuster, the other party can ask for a quorum call and force members of the filibusterers' party to come back to the Senate, even at 3 o'clock in the morning, or when important committee hearings are being held. And that would certainly make it harder to filibuster, would certainly make it a lot less popular among senators. The most effective reform would be to expand the exceptions, to follow the President of Reconciliation, which accepted the federal budget from filibusters. So it might be argued that other vital issue areas couldn't be filibustered either. For example, bills pertaining to voting rights. Knowing our current system and our current polarization, the likeliest possibility is that nothing will change, that the Senate will keep the filibuster and the president's remaining legislation will not pass the Senate. So in the short run, keeping the filibuster gives an advantage to the Republicans. That's especially true with regard to the voting rights legislation that Congress is considering. That bill would prevent a lot of states, virtually all of them Republican-dominated states, from making it harder or less convenient to vote. Almost all of these bills have been proposed by and are supported by Republican legislators and opposed by Democratic legislators. Most Republicans believe that if you make it easier to vote, then more marginal voters, those with less propensity to vote, will come to the polls. And many Republicans believe that these marginal voters are more likely to vote Democratic. So Republican-run state legislatures are passing these voting restrictions in the belief that with them, Republicans are more likely to win elections. The most interesting thing about this is that the evidence for that assumption, that the higher the turnout, the more likely Democrats are to win, is not clear. There's a lot of evidence that shows that there is no necessary partisan lean to a higher voter turnout. But whether or not it's accurate, people act on what it is that they believe. And the federal voting rights bill is regarded by Democrats as one of the most important Biden initiatives in this Congress. And unless the filibuster is weakened in some way, it will not pass the Senate. Okay, I've said enough. Let's hear from the rest of you. What comments and what questions do you have?
Thank you, Marjorie. Who has the first question for us?
This is Jim Jessen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
In my lifetime, our country is as polarized now as I have ever seen it. And you mentioned that in your presentation. Do you agree that this is one of the most polarizing times in our society, and to what do you attribute it?
Okay, thank you, Tim. Yes, there is no question. In fact, we can quantify that, which political scientists have a tendency to do. We are more polarized now than we have been at any time in 100 years. This is a remarkably polarized time. The reason is a bit more complicated than I suspect you want to hear, but it comes down to coalitional change in the two parties. In the 1940s and 1950s, the Democratic Party, as you may have read in history, was not speaking much about race. It was the Republican Party that was pro-civil rights at that time. But slowly, during the 40s and the 50s, interests within the Democratic Party began to be much more concerned about civil rights legislation. And the party moved in favor of a civil rights policy over time. Later, in 1964, the Republicans changed their traditional pro-civil rights stand to follow Barry Goldwater's stand that regardless of how you feel about race, a federal government that can enforce civil rights is too powerful a federal government. So conservative Southern whites who had almost genetically voted Democratic over time suddenly began to see that their Democratic Party was speaking in favor of an issue that they didn't agree with, and that the Republican Party under Goldwater was offering them an alternative, a way to say civil rights is bad policy and we should leave it to the states. Over time, that caused a pulling apart of the two parties' coalitions. Prior to that time, the Democrats included conservative white Southerners as well as lots of liberals. The Republicans included liberal Northeastern Republicans as well as Western conservatives. Now, the conservative Southern Democrats switched sides slowly. It took a long time, almost 50 years, and moved into the Republican Party. That led those liberal Northeastern Republicans to say, I'm in the wrong party, and move toward the Democrats. So whereas in the 50s, we had an overlap between the two parties. If somebody said, I'm a conservative, you really couldn't guess very easily whether they were a Democrat or Republican. Now, progressively, if somebody tells you I'm a conservative, there's no doubt what party they're a member of. They're not going to be a Democrat. That was the key to the movement of the two parties. And it's difficult to see it ending or changing anytime soon.
Thank you.
Isn't that what Lyndon Johnson predicted?
It was exactly what Lyndon Johnson predicted. He said when he signed the Civil Rights Act, I have lost the South for the Democrats for a generation. The only thing he got wrong was that it lasted longer than a generation. It still continues. You might wonder why the Democrats included conservative Southern whites to begin with, but that was really more a historical result than anything else. And as politics became much more contentious recently, the distinction between the two parties is so clear these days. Some of us who remember the old party system that had a lot of overlap might miss that. But in fact, there is very little that the two parties agree on substantively on issues. And that means compromise is really tough. We're also increasingly emphasizing terribly difficult symbolic issues on which it's harder and harder to compromise, where we end up talking about one party says the other party is going to take away your beef. You know, it's very difficult to discuss these kinds of issues in a more even New Deal way that says, okay, you guys want $1 for this, we want 50 cents, let's settle on 75.
What role have labor unions played in this?
A decreasingly small one.
Yeah.
It's labor unions, as you know, have declined to the point where only between 10 and 11% of American workers are now unionized.
Yeah.
And more than half of those are government workers. Unions have successively lost in public policy debates so that it's become harder and harder for them to organize. And unions have been the main support of Democratic Party organizations locally for really as long as unions have existed. So the loss of power of labor unions has been a major factor in the change in the Democratic Party's fortunes.
Marjorie, I'd like to play devil's advocate. To what degree do you think Americans see the debate over the filibuster as an arcane issue?
Oh, I think if you were asked the average American, what's the filibuster, they would probably tell you, say what? You know, who cares? This is one of those inside baseball things that Congress members fight about because it's a lot easier for us, and especially for people who don't have a whole lot of formal education, to perceive politics in their own terms as being like bullies fighting in the playground, or people who are very esoteric and not interested in the common people. These perceptions are really pretty simplified, but when you don't know very much about how it is that politics works, it's easy to kind of fall back into them. So most people really don't have a clue what the filibuster is and probably couldn't care less about it. That's one of the reasons why it becomes particularly a challenge for Democrats to muster support to end the filibuster, because it is arcane. And there was a time a while back when I think it was the Brennan Center for Justice made up a short film that was about the filibuster that had a central character whose name was Phil Buster. His first name was Phil and his last name was Buster, and tried to explain it. And I'll tell you, I had people following it, and and they pay me to do this stuff, you know.
Byron,
Can I ask a question?
just a moment, Gus. We had a question in the chat, and then we'll get to you right after. Byron, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to ask if you could say a little bit more about the filibuster as a legacy of Jim Crow.
Well, the filibuster was used as an instrument of Jim Crow. It didn't start with Jim Crow. The filibuster has been in the Senate's rules since something in the vicinity of 1817 or something like that. And for a long time, it was basically ignored. But Southern conservative Democrats in the late 1940s and 1950s and then 1960s saw this as an opportunity to be able to just simply stop the workings of Congress whenever liberals decided, and at that time, many of the liberals were Republicans, to bring up civil rights legislation. That's why there are so many lawyers in Congress. These are the people that the parties need to be able to look through the rules and figure out how they could be used in order to meet the substantive aims that people want. And that brings up a really important point. The rules always determine the outcome. It's true in virtually everything. It's often disguised because of the fact that, as you mentioned, very few people care about the rules. We think about those as being just sort of standard. But as Congressman John Dingell once said, give me the chance to make the rules and you make the policy, and I will, and then you can insert the expletive of your choice, you every time. The existence of the filibuster has made possible a lot of anti-majoritarian policy.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a
Just
question.
a moment, Charlotte. Gus Chikalis is next.
That's fine.
Yeah, I have a question. How much of the polarization is a result of social media, spin doctors, what have you? I'm thinking the selling of the president, 1968. Issues no longer matter. It became a marketing campaign, an image campaign. Nixon didn't win because of any issue. It was his marketing people. I mean, Reagan had nothing more than an image that he sold. It's, my fear is people no longer consider the issues. They consider the personalities. It's the persona that matters. It's an image that's being projected on endless TV ads, endless social media posts. The issues, most people don't even know what they are. Or if they do, they really don't care. There's siding with the personality of the person that's putting forward those issues. Did I explain that?
Yes, you certainly did. Let me just caution you a bit. I think that we've become much more attuned to spin and to constructed explanations that are intended to get across the viewpoint that the person who explains them wants us to hold. We've become much more attuned to that because of stuff like the selling of the president. Marketing has always been there. Honest Abe, the rail splitter, that was really quite a long time ago, and it didn't start with him either. I think it's important for us to keep in mind that although a lot of people don't really know squat about the substantive details of issues, there nevertheless are an awful lot of kind of underlying issue orientations that people do have. A lot of people are increasingly identifying themselves with conservatism and liberalism and can, at least in a very rudimentary way, explain what those mean. That liberals want change and conservatives don't want change. That's kind of minimal naturally, but we find generally in political science research that what is emphasized by the people in power tends to then be emphasized by the rest of us. At times when there are very few substantive issues being discussed, a lot of personality factors and image factors come into play. At times when the debate is more substantive, then these kinds of not necessarily detailed issues, but concerns about conservatism and liberalism come more into play. That's been the case in an interesting way recently because the two parties are not necessarily responding the same. The Democrats, as of course they've had to because they're the ones who control the federal government, at least nominally right now, have an issue agenda and they're very concerned about passing it. The Republicans have had a hard time attacking that issue agenda because a good deal of it is favored by a majority in the public. And so the Republicans have gone to more kind of classically image-oriented themes of, tarring liberals as snowflakes and people who are afraid of everything and people who are trying to plant microchips in people's brains through vaccines and God knows what else is happening these days. But the two parties are not symmetrical. They sometimes behave in different ways, and this is one of them. But we can't discount actual issues in a rudimentary way, in the way that says, I don't like people who are different from me, or I'm afraid of people who are different from me, or there's too much change going on and I'm fearful of it. And that can plug into conservatism and liberalism.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. Do you have a few minutes to stay after we close our program to answer some additional questions?
I certainly do. You know, there's nothing so pathetic as a teacher without an audience. So I'm happy to. Let me also, before you go, if I might, given that you are a public spirited group, just mention that we have recently started what's called the Monroe County Foster Closet. This is a group that is taking donations of clothing, baby equipment, toys, bedding, and providing them for free to local foster families and kinship adoptive families. Mm-hmm. What we're looking for now, especially, is a place to be. We have our basements, and that is the Monroe County Foster Closet at the moment. It's been very difficult to find any kind of place since we are without funds. So if anybody knows of a place where we might be able to store the growing numbers of donations, we would love to hear from you. We would really like to support those in our community who do the incredibly difficult and thankless job of fostering children. Mm-hmm. So let me know. Hershey@indiana.edu.
That was going to be my next question. We'll certainly put you on that.
Thank you.
Okay. In honor of your presentation today, we will be making a donation to Monroe County United Ministries. So thank you for being here. And Sally, will you tell us about next week's program?
Yes, next week is a true highlight of our Rotary year. We'll be presenting the high school scholarships, hosted by Scholarship Chair Matt Stitzinger.
Thank you. It's always one of my favorite programs, so I hope that you'll join us. All right, let's recite the 4-way test +1 together, and then we will have some additional questions. Of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth?
Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
And fifth,
is it fun?
Okay. Who is up next with a question for Marjorie?
Do I have some questions?
Go ahead, Charlotte. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Marjorie, a few weeks, is she there?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I'm still here.
Okay, I have a few weeks ago, I was watching the firing line, you know, Margaret Hoover, I believe it is. Sort of the continuation of the William F. Buckley program. And she's very interesting. She had Neil Gorsuch on the first Supreme Court justice that Trump nominated. And I thought he was very good. I was impressed by him. But his point was made that the important thing, that there are many democracies, or have been many democracies, but we were different because we stress the balance of power, the separation of powers, and checks and balances. And so that really protects our democracy. So I was interested, he made that a very big point in his way of presenting. And the question was, how does the Supreme Court function? He says, we are independent. We are not political. Well, I just wonder if you have a comment on all that. Okay. Your comment goes ahead of you. Your giggling goes ahead of you. Okay.
Absolutely. Let me make two comments about that. First, to say that the Supreme Court is not political is what you would expect from somebody who is trying to defend a political body against the charges that it's political. If the Supreme Court were not political, then there wouldn't be partisan fights over who the president nominated to the Supreme Court. And they are partisan fights, and they are very bitter. It's just most people are partisan. The fact that you're a Supreme Court justice doesn't make you nonpartisan. And being partisan means that you hold a certain set of views. And to say that you have two parts in your brain, there's the regular part that's partisan, and then there's the Supreme Court part that only pays attention to the law, ignores the fact that laws mean power. Laws reflect different kinds of conceptions of how power ought to be used. Partisanship is central to understanding that. And in fact, if we take a look at which party's president appointed particular Supreme Court justices, we get a really good prediction of how they vote on issues in the Supreme Court. So with all due respect to Justice Gorsuch, good try, no cigar. I think that the kind of polarization that we have seen reflects a lot, though, of what Justice Gorsuch is saying about the power of our definition of democracy, which is to really preference individual rights over community and public good. I think we can see that in the fact that, for example, we are debating now, and the Supreme Court is debating whether or not the law should permit people to carry weapons concealed without a permit. There is no democracy on earth that permits that right now. I mean, you know, when you think about it, does that mean flamethrowers? I mean, if I can conceal a flamethrower, if I wear a really big cape, you know, will that be okay? That shows, I think, the extent to which we prioritize the freedom of the individual over the good of the community. Now, if those two always went hand in hand, that would not be a problem. But they don't always go hand in hand, because you're going to have some folks who define their own individual freedom as requiring hurting somebody else. It's a fascinating thing to me, especially when you look at freedom of speech. We have the broadest conception of freedom of speech of any democratic nation. In most democracies, there are some things you're not allowed to say. In Germany, you're not allowed to question whether or not the Holocaust happened. In the United States, there is no such law unless you're doing something that involves a clear and present danger by doing so. I think what we have to be careful of is that in recent years, we've moved that balance more in the direction of individual freedom and less in the direction of community needs than is probably wise. We can certainly see that with respect to the vaccine. It's just absolutely fascinating to me how people can say, it's my right to hold irrational beliefs, even if they harm the community. And part of this, I suppose, is simply because we need better science training in the schools so that people can manage to let go of the belief that it's possible for a vaccine to contain a microchip in which the government will, after that, have the power to direct everything that you do. If that's the case, then this talk that I've just given, in fact, has been programmed by the government because I am fully vaccinated. We've gone way in the direction of individual freedom, much more than most other democracies.
Thank you.
Have a question in the chat, a few questions in the chat I'd like to pose to you, and then we can move on to the next. Bill Brown says he would subscribe to a Marjorie Hershey podcast. You have a weekly your radio show or anything you could share with us?
I think my grandchildren would roll their eyes if they heard something like that. But thank you. That's very kind.
Not to know. Well, we'll see if we can make that happen, because I think we have several members here that nodded and clapped in agreement with that. Alon, did you want to?
Sure. So, I mean, I don't quite know how to ask this as a question, but I'd be interested to get your opinion about whether in the political realm, it's possible to wrestle to the ground the sort of dislocation, the sort of the fantastical way that politics has been debated. There seems to be so much myth making that is then propelled by political agendas, to the point where, as you say, with the vaccine, to the point where science does not actually prevail, where common knowledge doesn't really drive the conversation any longer. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how, in the political realm, it might be possible for us to wrestle that issue to the ground.
Alan, you're raising a question that was raised in the Constitutional Convention. We've been dealing with this throughout our history. The fantastical beliefs that we run into now are remarkably similar to the fantastical beliefs that were present at the time of the Revolution. So we've been dealing with this throughout history. The challenge we've got now is that social media make them so much faster. Mark Twain, 100 years ago, at least, is reputed to have said, I've often tried to find the original source of this quote and can't, that a lie can go around the world 7 times while the truth is still lacing up its boots. And now I think we'd probably have to say like 700 times, because all you have to do is to press click, and you've forwarded something that is complete nonsense. So the changes in technology have certainly made this much more obvious to us. But, the notion of a one world government, of powerful forces that oddly enough so often are claimed to be Jewish, are responsible for everything that's happening on Earth, was present at the time of the Constitutional Convention. There were tons of people who believed that there was some force pulling the strings. And I have colleagues now who are studying conspiracy theories and doing some really interesting work, who find that there's a lot of continuity among these conspiracy theories over time. There seems to be a certain type of thinking that is more prone to these types of thinking, that people who are more fearful, people who believe themselves to be more at risk, are more likely to believe that there is some conspiracy going on that's in control of them and everybody else. And in fact, one of my colleagues at Dartmouth, Brendan Nyhan, whose work is just fascinating, found, and this isn't published and it hasn't gone through the peer review process, but it's intuitively very attractive. The one thing that he was able to do to get people to let loose of conspiracy theories, he tried a whole series of things in a set of surveys. The one thing that made people doubt conspiracy theories was when he primed them, raised a question for them before presenting the conspiracy that made them think well of themselves, the survey respondents. When you did things to bolster their self-esteem and make them feel more secure, they were less likely to believe that there was some group of lizard pedophiles out there who are kidnapping hundreds of thousands of children, who oddly enough nobody seems to miss, but are still having that happen. That's kind of a scary thought. It sort of brings us back to the California self-esteem movement, which didn't work too well, about 30 or 40 years ago. But I think it does help us understand that things may not be quite so dire in the future, in that it's apparent that the pandemic has raised everybody's threat level. When you're in the middle of a global pandemic, people get scared. They feel impotent. And if they do, the result, they might well be inclined to accept more conspiracy theories. But, God willing, the pandemic will be brought under control at some point in the not too far distant future. And maybe a bunch of folks will be able to let go of the lizard pedophiles as a result.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Raj, did you have a question?
Yes. Good afternoon, Margie. Thank you for present today.
You're welcome.
We learn a lot from you. What does it take the United States one day to move for electing our president by the populist vote rather than electoral college?
If I were you, most people favor that, and it's probably not going to happen. The reason it's not going to happen is that it's a constitutional rule, and therefore would require a constitutional amendment to change. And it's really hard to amend the Constitution, particularly because we're thinking about the need for change in the Electoral College during a few months every 4-year period. And the rest of the time, we're thinking about healthcare and foreign policy and budgets and everything else. So the movement to eliminate the Electoral College typically loses force within a few months after the presidential election ends. There are a couple of alternatives that don't require a constitutional amendment. There is one that in which state legislatures are invited to join a national compact that says that when a majority of state electoral voters agree, any state will cast its electoral votes for the national popular vote winner rather than for whoever won the popular vote in that state. So that would in effect modify the Electoral College without the need for a constitutional amendment. The problem is there's no enforcement possibility there. You know, what if you say that, okay, a bunch of these are Republican states and they've agreed to cast their electoral votes in favor of the national popular vote winner, and the national popular vote winner turns out to be a Democrat, who can force them to go through what it is that they promised to do? So to be frank, I think the chance of modifying the Electoral College are so slim that people ought to put their energies into things that are more likely to be accomplished.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
It's a really tough one. So I say to my 6-year-old grandson, I wish I would be alive in 25 more years because I'd like to know what historians will write about the presidency of Donald Trump. What do you think they will write?
Keep in mind that you know, historians don't have an awful lot of room in textbooks to write about each individual president, so they tend to pick out the dominant theme. And historians also know that history texts are adopted by, in many areas, elected commissions. The state boards of education or textbook commissions that, for example, in Texas are popularly elected. So they have to be very cautious about what it is that they say. And what I assume they would say in the most gentle possible way to get their textbooks adopted in Texas, which is the biggest market for school texts, that President Trump worked hard to undo the legacy of liberal presidents who had come before him, but that he was only partially successful, that he used executive orders to do that, but wasn't able to get very much through the Congress, even when in fact his party was in the majority in both the House and the Senate, and to a much lesser extent when his party was not in the majority. I can tell you what I think a lot of historians will write in history journals, and it will be very different from that. And it will have a lot to do with the fragility of democratic institutions, small d democratic, and how they were really in many ways systematically attacked by the presidency of Donald Trump. But that will remain in the historians and political scientists' journals. Mm-hmm. It won't be read in textbooks that are used in Texas schools.
Thank you.
Sure. Or even Indiana.
or in Indiana, that's right.
Maybe Minnesota. It is a question, isn't it, of community versus isolationism.
I'm sorry, Charlotte.
I said it's a question of community versus rugged individualism.
Yeah, yeah. We're, you know, it fascinated me that when my husband and I lived in Germany for a couple of years, an awful lot of the folks we knew in Germany were just fascinated by fictional books about the American West. The Marlboro Man, you know, the cowboy who was oddly enough only white in the fiction. In about 1/3 of the cases, the cowboy was African American, but it was, I think, an attraction to the idea that somebody could be almost completely independent. In Germany, where you're living mostly in flats rather than individual homes, and where there's very little green space, you can't maintain the fiction that you're the Marlboro Man. You know, you're going to run your horse right into somebody else, you know, before you go 2 or 3 feet. We've had this open space to a degree that most other democracies have not.
Yeah.
It's helped us to maintain this fiction that we are completely individual, the Ayn Rand notion of individual freedom, which is just fascinating to me. I keep on getting people saying, what do you mean I owe anything to the community? I built my business on my own. And I keep hoping that somebody asks these folks, okay, so you poured the concrete for the sidewalk that lets your customers come to your business, and you formed the police department that is there for you if anybody ever breaks in, and the fire department that is going to put out the fire at your business, and then you generated the postal service so that back in the day you could get checks from people. But we tend to take for granted the existence of all of these services that the community provides. And we tend to claim that somehow we paid for it because we paid some taxes, without really thinking about just how much we depend on one another. Even in the pandemic, I think that's been one of the causes of the terribly funny thing about, oh my God, you know, it's such an invasion of your privacy to have to wear a little piece of cloth over your face, you know, that we are so used to thinking of ourselves as independent that the thought that we might not be is kind of frightening to a lot of people, instead of kind of joyous that, you know, thank heaven there are people around us, and there is a post office that was built for people who weren't just doing it for themselves, but for those of us yet to come. That's a way of thinking about public life that I'm afraid we've lost an awful lot of.
Well, it interests me because what role religion plays in this.
Oh yeah, you know, and religion is playing a less and lesser role over time. The Pew Research Center has just put out some new data that show that more than half of Americans are now unchurched, and increasing proportions consider themselves secular rather than religious, which, you know, can be a faith in itself. I mean, a faith in the community. But it's just become much more difficult for people to see the community as us rather than the community as them. It's not easy to figure out how to restore that.
Right. Not good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Much for staying after and entertaining the rest of our questions. I'm sure we could talk for much longer. If anyone has any final comments or questions, we certainly can hear that. And then
let me just make one myself, and that's that, you know, you folks are one of the communities to which we owe a lot. The kinds of groups like Rotary that remind people that there are, in fact, community values, that's just crucial. You know, we've lost a lot of that in our public life, and we need to hang on to and restore and regenerate as much of it as we can. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll wrap up today and we will see you all next week. And I hope, Marjorie, you'll join us again soon.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me today.
Oh, you're most welcome.
It was really, really exciting to hear about it all.
Thank you.
All right, everyone have a great week.